io ho una domanda di chiarimento, che forse, well, just to clarify a point that in my reading is always problematic. When you present the mental as normative and evaluative, I need to know normative according to which standard, or better, who decide the standard of this particular normativity? In the sense that if I understand that Kantian term, for example, what is normative is something that I have to acknowledge as law constitution, so to speak. So in the case of the mental, where is the source of normativity?
Okay.
I don't know if my question is clear enough.
Yeah, I think so. At least I can, it gives me the chance to make something clearer. I try to say, I didn't want to say that there is a particular set of norms universally applied. In contemporary philosophy, some say an essential or a distinguishing feature of the mental is its aboutness, right? And if some intentionality in this sense, if something is about something, then it makes sense to ask whether it's right or wrong. If it's only causality, it doesn't make sense. And that there is the possibility to ask the question simply means that there is normativity. There are ways to match it or not to match it. And this is not part of the causal language, it is part of the teleological language. This is why I say the evaluated normative is part of this story, that there is an essentialist thing going on. And that's not evolution.
Okay, the essentialist point.
That's it.
This is according to me.
Right, okay. This is an Aristotelian point in the end, I think. Only here the essences are historical and so on. For sure there is later in his system, just to say the not so attractive aspect here, there is progress in history in cultural forms, becoming better representations and institutionalizations of what autonomy is. And if you say these are specific norms for better or less good states, you have the normativity in the other sense. And then you can say it's Eurocentrism or something like that. Okay. But concerning the mental, this is only the ento-naturalist point. You cannot get this aspect by only using functional or causal notions. And this is the main strand in contemporary philosophy. Okay?
Thank you.
Not more I wanted to establish with that so far. Which norms are the best? It's a different question.
Luca o Federico o Giulia, chi è più correlato? Allora cominciamo con Giulia.
Ich würde gerne auf Deutsch sprechen.
Das freut mich.
Also ich hätte eine Frage über einen Begriff, der zu der Handlungstheorie gehört und über den Sie etwas schon gesagt haben, und zwar den Begriff Schuld. Denn ich denke, dass dieser Begriff ein bisschen problematisch ist, und zwar, dass der Begriff zwei verschiedene Bedeutungen in sich enthält. Wenn wir zum Beispiel an die Schuld an der Tat denken, das wäre also eine Verursachung, Schuld als Verursachung. Aber wenn wir über die Schuld an der Handlung sprechen, verstehen wir etwas anderes. Aber ich denke, dass man nicht so einfach sagen kann, dass Schuld haben immer die Verantwortung oder die Verursachung bezeichnet. Und das Schuldsein immer für die Verursachung steht. Denn, also das ist problematisch. Ich würde fragen, wie sehen diese zwei Bedeutungen im Begriff von Schuld miteinander zu verknüpfen und auch in Bezug auf die Zuschreibung.
Ja.
Das interessiert mich.
Das war der Vortrag, den ich eigentlich angeboten hätte. Causality and Responsibility in Hegels Action Theory. Ja. Perfekte Frage. I think I have to answer in English, right? Okay. Hegel is a very good analytical philosopher, and he makes a conceptual distinction. And you find in him this distinction between Schuld sein and the second Schuld haben. This is the causal sense of Schuld. And this is a normative or evaluative form. And he is distinguishing it very clearly that you can mean by Schuld only the causal relation, or you can mean this normative relation. Okay? In contemporary moral philosophy, in the Anglo-American tradition, they are discussing it under the notion of responsibility. And I'm doing it also in Germany, in the German word is Verantwortung. And if you take responsibility, you can have the causal meaning, and you can have the normative meaning, or evaluative. Normally it's normative, right? And to be responsible for in the causal sense means to be a necessary part of the story that something happened. But a lot of things you are, in this sense, responsible, you are not responsible in the normative sense. Okay? And you use the German word Zurechnung, and Hegel also did it because he developed his action theory starting from the law and what law includes, right? And they have made all these distinctions for more than 1,000 years. And the notion of Zuschreibung or attribution can also mean attribute someone merely a causal role or a normative role. Okay? So we have all the things we need to distinguish, right? No problem in terms of conceptual clarification in Hegel. He distinguished it very clearly what the causal story is and what the normative story is. But if you have done that, now if it comes to moral philosophy, the interesting question is, are you morally responsible for everything you are causally responsible for? Hegel says, in antics, yes, Oedipus did that. The modern development, and this is why the modern have invented the notion of action in the full sense. They make a distinction between what someone caused and what he intended. And now the next thing is, am I normatively responsible only for those things I intended? And Hegel said no. If you have something like Negligence, yeah, the German word is Fahrlässigkeit. You should have seen that this will happen, but you didn't care. So you didn't intend it, but you should have taken it into account. And then you are responsible, although you are not intending it. So you cannot say you are responsible only for what you intended, right? And then, other side, the question is, maybe we can say, I can be normatively responsible only for those aspects which I causally am responsible for. So this is a necessary element of that, and even there you can find counterexamples. Doesn't work. And Hegel was the first who invented a special version of normative responsibility which is not needing causal responsibility. If you are institutionally responsible because of your role and you don't care and you omit doing something, there is no causal relation you have to an accident, but you are normatively responsible. If you are a nurse in charge and you go somewhere and you don't inform another person to take care of the patients for some minutes, there's an omission, you avoid doing something. It's your duty because you are the nurse in charge, and something happens there. And you haven't done anything, you are not even there. Maybe you are in a plane to China or something like that. But you are responsible in the normative sense. So the complicated structure is, there can be causal responsibility without normative responsibility. Right? What I'm doing here now may have a causal effect of people living in 10 million years, but no normative relation established by that. And there can be normative relations not backed by causal relations. This is the less usual way, but there is, especially in institutionalized settings, you have that problem. This is in the part of collective responsibility and so on in the contemporary action theory. Hegel is dealing with it. And his answer, and this is a pragmatist lesson to learn, he is not giving a general theory, but he says, let's look at the structure of excuses. In which case do I accept an excuse? Saying, well, you are the causal responsible one, but you're not the normative one. And we make a list on the features of the situation, and then we get an idea how the complex world is here. There is no perfect match between the causal structure and the normative structure for finite beings. This is the definition for the finite actor. The only actor who is overcoming that problem is the idea, because everything is internal there. This is a massive teleological approach, but never for human actors. Yeah? This is objective spirit only, and so you always have cases in which things don't match. But it's perfect. He's dealing with these questions in his element of right, and these things I find totally interesting in terms of philosophy, because he's really trying to understand our social practices of giving excuses, saying someone is guilty or not guilty, and so on. Yeah. So I hope his distinction is Schuld sein and Schuld haben. Ja.
Ich würde noch etwas fragen.
Ja.
Also kann man also sagen, dass dieses Problem vielleicht auf der Stufe der Sittlichkeit aufgehoben oder aufgehoben wird durch dann den Institutionen oder?
I would put it the other way around. The problem will never be solved perfectly. This is a defining feature of objective spirit. It is solved conceptually within absolute spirit, because there we are only in interpretations. But you are right, if single human actors suffer from the mismatches, they invent institutions, explicit rules, how to deal with the problems. Giving excuses and giving reasons is one of it. Oedipus didn't have the chance to explain himself. He was taken guilty because the moral language had not been developed. Would it have been developed, he could have made excuses, explaining his point of view, but then you need the idea of having a point of view in normative questions, right? And Sittlichkeit, it's a problem because the starting point of Sittlichkeit is before the modern morality. You have to have the overall philosophy of right, because some of the elements are in the abstract right. If you have insurance companies, for example, if you don't take criminal law but civil law, I think you drive a car or something like that. If you drive a car and you don't make any mistake, it can happen that you hurt someone. And then you have an insurance. No question of the criminal law. And this is such an institution, how to deal with questions like these, because driving a car is such a complex affair that things can go wrong. And therefore we invent these things. And all these, this is what he's trying to do. The point is, you are right, you need Sittlichkeit, because in Sittlichkeit it is made explicit that the normative is a socially shared standard of rule following. And that's missing in the morality chapter. It's purely subjective. And that there is a kind of conflict of perspectives is missing in abstract law. They are always on the same level. Until the end, when it comes to crime, there is a problem, but this is where it goes over. So you're right in the one sense, but not in the sense that in Sittlichkeit nothing of this kind will happen anymore. Institutions cannot really avoid that things go wrong. They give you rules how to deal with it.
Sie können das kontrollieren, vielleicht.
You can try to avoid mistakes by controlling things, but even if you have the perfect control, things go wrong. Yeah. If you have too large control itself becomes the problem. If you start washing your hands 100 hours before starting to go to the patient, he's dead because you had too much control in infection avoiding cleaning measures. Right? So the notion of objective spirit in Hegel really means it doesn't make fully sensed. Something always can be destroyed per accident. There's a limit of reason there. But he quoted in German because I cannot translate it. In Germany, in the edition, in one place in the Element of Rice, he says, "Der Stein aus der Hand ist des Teufels." Und meint, if you throw a stone, in that moment he leaves your hand. It's in the hand of the world and not in your control anymore. But to be a responsible agent means to accept this risk. He is not accepting the Kantian way to say that morality is dealing only with autonomy in the internal structure, whatever the consequences are. He says, for human agents, we have to accept limits of control. And this is good or bad luck, but this is part of human nature. And this is why we are objective spirit and not absolute spirit. Yeah. And in subjective spirit means that you can be ill. An organism is subjective spirit, and it means it's only a perfect structure realizing the idea for some time. If it's no longer realizing it, it becomes ill. Illness in Hegel, for example, is a kind of self-destruction of the idea structure embodied in an organism. So we are only temporarily matching the structures. This is this idea here. So I hope it's
vielen Dank.
fun. Okay.
Federico?
Yeah, I have a question about the paper Hegel's planning theory of plans. I had just a worry about, by the way, on the title of the paper is planning theory, because it seemed to me that Hegel is not interested in the planning of the action, but is interested in a retrospective theory of action plans, and not on the theory on how to plan actions. But this is not the most important question.
Well, it's a very interesting one.
Yeah,
but go on, I just hear more.
Okay. And the second question is about the relation between the two types of justifications of the phenomenon of the practice of ascribing responsibility. One is metaphysics of subjectivity, and the other one is a self-understanding of our self-understanding as members of a shared social practice.
Yes.
And it seems to me that three ways of establishing
can we make a full stop here? I start answering the first question, and then you put that on the again, because it's a very different story, and it's also very interesting. I gave this paper the title for a very simple reason. When I wrote my book on Hegel's concept of action, 91, Michael Bradman had just his first book on action theory in 87, where he developed Count coming from Davidson, giving a richer analysis of what intention is. And he called that planning theory of action. And in my book, which was published then, and I wrote it in 91, it published in 93, I had a footnote at one place and said, here you can see that Hegel was one who holds the planning theory of action. This is why I said what Bradman has established in contemporary analytical theory of action, Hegel had done already in his book also. And when I wrote the paper, I simply referred to that footnote in my book to say, now I spell out what I meant there. If you have an action, take an action. Before the action, you have this intentions before action. Here you have the intention in action, right? And then it's finished, you have state of the world. I explain it in a minute. And this is the realized intention. Okay? What I mean by planning theory of action is not here. And this is what you are right. You said Hegel is not so much interested in what's happening before someone is doing it. You are planning a journey or something. That's not the point I'm making.
I mean, the subject matter of an ideal Hegel's theory of action is not planning.
No, that's wrong. That claim is wrong. You are right, he is not dealing with it here, but he's dealing with it here. So, you are right and you are wrong, and I try to explain in which sense you are right and in which sense your remark is wrong. Okay? You are right in saying that Hegel's theory of action is not dealing mainly with this part before acting. This is not part of his main, not in most parts not. Okay? We agree. Right? I agree with your description that Hegel is not dealing with planning in this sense of making plans before acting. Okay? My notion of planning theory, like Bretman's, is not a label for this, but it's a label here. And the point Hegel makes, it says, you can have very different intentions. I give you an example from him. He says, someone has burned a house, killing a family living in the house. Okay? And now you ask him, what have you intended? And this guy says, I only wanted to burn this part of wood. I didn't want to burn the house. Right? The question is, how rich is the intention in action? And Hegel makes following theory. He says we have a very limited, called Vorsatz, and an extended Absicht. Okay? And then he relates this to his science of logic. He says this is a special version of judgment, this is another one, more complex. And the thing simply is, you can read Davidson as an action theorist only dealing with intentions of this kind, and you can understand Bretman of giving a more elaborated version of action theory by having this intentions, with a more complex grammar. This is what Bretman calls planning theory of action, this richer structure of intentions. And you find this in Hegel's analysis when he comes from Vorsatz to Absicht. This is all I wanted to say. And this makes a difference in ascribing responsibility. And this is very important for negligence, for example. Yeah, if you have a weapon and you go into a school and you are shooting around and someone asks you, what have you done? You killed a lot of people. You say, well, I just wanted to make some noise. Right? You would not, even if you are insane, or you would have to take responsibility for the killed children. Because the standard is a normal adult person in our culture, having the knowledge normal persons have, has to know that a loaded weapon is nothing and shooting is nothing happening in the schoolyard. And if you say, I only intended to hear the noise, it's not a good excuse. Either you are insane and you are a limited actor, or you haven't matched the rational standards as being part of intentionality of acting. This is what Hegel is saying there. And this is basically the same idea Michael Bretman had in his planning theory of action, which he established in a lot of papers. That's all there. But I think Hegel did it. And it's not a question here. It's a question of the complexity of the intention in action. Right? You can buy an apple. And you can buy an apple simply to have an apple. Or you can buy an apple avoiding that it is from a regime in which human rights are neglected and so on. So it can be a very political action in your intention, a symbolic one, right? And this means what the intention in action is not a kind of brain state, but it's a complex social pattern. And this is what Hegel had analyzed in the philosophy of morality, in his trying to analyze our practices of being responsible, describing responsibility. So I think we are we are discussing now on the same thing. We are discussing not this, but we are discussing this structure. And this is what Hegel calls Absicht, and this is what Bradman calls planning. And this is all I mean. I don't say that Hegel uses the notion of plan. That's right. He uses the notion of Absicht for it. Yeah?
I think the difference is significant. It signals the difference in focus between Bradman's orientation and Hegel's orientation on action.
No.
It seems to me that focus on Bradman is...
well, Bradman has used his planning theory of action to analyze the notion of responsibility from the background also.
Yeah, but the premises of this interest seems to me are the relation between the development of intention and time and the conception of personal identity.
This is one...
In an empirical...
I disagree. This is one chapter in his 2007 book when he's doing that. But the first book when he developed it is simply to give a rich analysis of Anscombe's intention and action. The latter things are later. But it's okay, we don't have to discuss Bradman philology, it's okay. The other thing is also very illuminating concerning Hegel. And now I ask you to, I think you said we have subjectivity, right? And then you said we have this metaphysical. And what was your alternative?
No, it was not my alternative. I was trying to elucidate the kind of alternative I find in your paper.
Yeah, you do that again.
So the metaphysics of subjectivity is first kind of justification, and the second is our self-understanding as members of shared social practice.
Yeah. Shared social practice.
Also called the everyday experience of agency.
Yeah.
Every day.
This can be, yeah, that's right. Well, I think I can give a very quick answer if I get the point correctly. I think you mean by the metaphysical structure of subjectivity, this is what I have said, this idea structure, right? The metaphysical structure is this, what I had on the blackboard here with the self-realization of the idea.
Yeah, more or less.
Okay. You remember the last of my fierce question, it was how to deal with Hegel's metaphysical structure, right? And then you say, Quante's pragmatist reading of Hegel is nothing but this, right?
Yeah, I absolutely that your interpretation is or hinges upon a decision on how to discuss, how to establish this, so to say, precarious balance, this relationship between these two kinds of justification of Hegel's theory.
Perfectly right. You are perfectly right. I have
is a reduction according to which one has to replace the other.
I can tell a little bit.
Is a preservation, is a foundation.
Yeah. You want to say how I deal with the Temi,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Pretty fair. First, you are right. To organize my introductory lecture, I used both sides. Yeah. I used the very sketchy structure you all know from the encyclopedia to make understandable the attractive features I identify in Hegel, right? This is what I did. And then at the end I say, if this is such a good theory, and we need this to establish it, do we have to buy this metaphysical theory or not? This is my last question. And to put it in a very crude answer is, this is nothing but the general grammar of that. So there is no difference. This is the most abstract description of this. There is nothing behind it. It's a totally non-metaphysical, in this sense, metaphysical as opposed to this. This is pragmatism as such, I would say. And if you say, Brendeman would say, we reduce this to pragmatism, right? And I would say there is nothing to be reduced, because in Hegel there is nothing but pragmatics. It's all about life form. No transcendence. This is why I say I'm a left Hegelian. No transcendence. And concerning, and there is a difference between Hegel's self-understanding and mine, to be totally fair. Hegel thinks that the practical is an aspect of the theoretical philosophy, right? This is what he calls the practical aspect of philosophy is a moment of speculation. I would say speculation is a moment of the practical. Philosophy is a practical affair. In Hegel, this is where I leave Hegel. Hegel is oscillating here because he uses notions like spontaneity. The idea is treated as an actor, and you can even say it's only metaphor. But then you have to tell me a metaphor for what? Nobody has, as far as I know the literature, has given an answer to that question I really can understand. And I would say, no, it's not a metaphor. It's an expression of our being as actors in the world. Nothing else. In its most general and universal and philosophically organized form. That's it. And this is made for making intelligible our being in the world. And this is a pragmatist reading in it. And this is a left Hegelian. This is basically the debate between the left and the right Hegelians. The right Hegelians wanted to say there is something like theology, metaphysics in the classical sense, a pre-Kantian version of it, and I would say no. Hegel is a radical Wittgensteinian. There is nothing beyond. But I agree, this is highly contested, but this is my answer, yeah? I can make this understandable by showing that it helps to understand this. And more of it is not in that story. That's all. If I cannot reconstruct it in this way, I leave it and let others explain it to me. This is what James said. If it makes no difference, it makes no difference. And if it makes a difference, it must make it here. This would be my answer to your story. But I know you can have a very different reading of Hegel. That's totally okay. Yeah. But it's my way of doing it.